It's day 473 of Megan's diet, and today she's having an olive. That Newcastle accent was probably both offensive and embarrassing. I apologize. Hey there guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for another spooky episode of Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a true crime case and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. It's hot as balls in here today. If you like all things true crime, supernatural, UFO, conspiracy theory, and all that good stuff in between, then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you each week with our true crime killer weekends, and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our Left for Reddit and Weirdo Wednesdays, where we'll discuss something spooky I've heard. I will leave a small disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. It does involve details of violent crime and also the sexual assault of a minor. If that is a trigger point for you, then please feel free to turn away now. But before we dive into this week's episode, let me introduce you to our fabulous sponsor, HelloFresh. If you've been a fan of my channel for a while, then you'll know how much my family and I love HelloFresh. Being the first carbon neutral meal kit company who also ensure that almost all of their packaging is recyclable shows me that HelloFresh are a company that care. They've even teamed up with Plastic Bank, preventing 10 million bottles from entering the ocean every year. Have you got a fussy eater in your family? Well, HelloFresh offer over 55 weekly options featuring seasonal and pre-portioned ingredients picked at peak ripeness. The Hello Custom option allows you to customize your box by swapping out one protein or side for another, or by adding protein to a veggie recipe. I used to suffer from stove-aphobia, but with HelloFresh's foolproof step-by-step recipes, it's made cooking a joyful experience for me. With meal options that can be made in 30 minutes or less, this means my fiance and I can spend less time in the kitchen and more quality time together. So if you're looking to up your kitchen game this summer, then go to hellofresh.com and use code MEGAN16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. That's hellofresh.com and use code MEGAN16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. Now my wee gremlins, it's officially summer. Sun is shining, flowers are blooming, birds are singing, and Scotland is constantly raining. I loved being a kid. You know, during the summer there was always something to do when you were a child, whether that be going to the beach with your friends, or going to a summer carnival, or drinking underage in the local park. I do love me a wee carnival though. Candy floss, roller coasters, those burgers with the questionable meat inside. Is it beef? Is it cat? Who knows? It's all part of the fun. But behind the scenes of every fun fair, there's a dark side. And no, I'm not talking about the wooden roller coasters with a few screws missing, or the cat patties, or the clowns who hand out those balloons shaped like animals. I'm talking about some real horror. Criminals, drifters with dark hidden pasts, using a career in the travelling show as a way to stay incognito. In a place where kids are laughing and machines are whirring and no one can hear you scream. Tonight, everyone, we will be discussing the murder of Mark Tildesley, Carnival of Souls. Friday of May 25th, 1984 was an exciting one for school children across England. It was the start of the Easter holidays, or spring break for you guys in the US, where before global warming, kids in the UK could look forward to 1 week of freedom and solid sunshine. For 7-year-old Mark Tildesley, it also meant the arrival of the local carnival. The Frank Ayres Fun Fair came to the town of Wokingham for times a year, and little Mark couldn't wait to ride the waltzers and the large Ferris wheel, which could be seen from his family's home on Rose Court. But entry into the carnival was pricey, and sadly Mark's 30 pence a week pocket money wasn't going to cut it. So he was a clever boy and he came up with a plan. You see, here in the UK, to ensure that we don't steal shopping carts, we have to put a £1 coin in the shopping cart and we don't get it back unless we return it to the store. Back in 1984, it was only a 10 pence piece that was required to hire out these shopping carts. So young Mark, using his entrepreneurial mindset, thought if he returned all of these carts back to Tesco, he could keep the 10 pence in each trolley. For one whole week, the 7-year-old did this, stopping every time he saw one on the street. And the staff at Tesco even recall seeing these phantom trolleys moving towards the store. And then they realised that no, it was just tiny Mark behind them pushing them along. On the 1st of June 1984, whilst out on the hunt, Mark happened to walk by a sweetie shop named the Candy Shop. A mystery man then met Mark outside of the shop and gave him 50p to spend on whatever he wanted inside. He also told Mark that if he met him at the fun fair that night, he would give him money to have a ride on the dodgems. The young schoolboy couldn't believe his luck as he said goodbye and headed into the sweet shop to spend his 50 pence. What a generous offer! What a kind stranger! But obviously, you and I, being adults, know better. That afternoon, Mark travelled back home to have dinner with his family, Mum Lavinia, Dad John and his older brother Christopher. It was said he was so excited about the fun fair he could barely sit still at the table. His mum left for work at 5:15 p.m. and she was soon followed by Mark, who left for the carnival at 5:45. He'd thrown on a bomber jacket with a tiger motif on the back and headed off on his beloved gold bike. Mark had promised his father before leaving that he would return home by 7:30 p.m. En route, Mark was met by two of his school friends who said that they were going to go home for some dinner and head to the carnival later. But Mark, being so excited, he didn't want to wait around and decided to head to the carnival alone. It was only a short cycle away, half a mile to be exact, from the family home. This was 1984, it was a quiet town and there was no need to be afraid. As night fell across Wokingham, 7:30 p.m. came and went with no sign of Mark. His parents had a bad feeling right away. He was very quiet and bookish and extremely reliable, so this was really out of character for Mark. Worrying about him when he still hadn't arrived at 8 p.m. at night, they decided to go to the carnival and ask around if anyone had seen him. But he wasn't there. They did find his gold Tomahawk bike chained up outside the fun fair, which was a bit of a relief because they then knew he had made it safely to his destination. Knowing that some of his little friends were also going to the carnival that night, they had hoped that maybe with it being quite dark outside, one of their parents had offered Mark a ride home. So they went back to the house expecting to find him there. But when they got back, it was just Christopher sitting watching television alone in the house. At 10 p.m, Mark's mum Lavinia called local police, but she was told to call back in an hour if he still hadn't arrived home. She couldn't just sit around and do nothing, so his parents then called Mark's older sister Christina and her husband Ted, who lived in Finchampstead 15 minutes away with their 3-year-old daughter. Ted was also worried when he heard that Mark hadn't arrived back home and thought it sounded strange, so he went to the carnival to look for him also, but again he found nothing. Despite initial delays earlier that evening, the Thames Valley Police soon realised that something was off when Mark hadn't arrived back home by midnight. Helicopters searched over the fairground and local bodies of water but found no trace of the missing boy. Heat-seeking equipment borrowed from the London Metropolitan Police was used to see if any remains had been disposed of in the area. Carnival employees were interviewed one by one, but unfortunately not everyone who had attended that night could be accounted for. The travelling show community back in the 1980s hardly did things by the books. Many of them were drifters who would come in and out of different towns just looking for temporary work, some even using fake names. So it'd be extremely easy for a stranger to pop into town and then disappear into the night. Over 960 doors were knocked on, but after 1 week with no new information, law enforcement decided to step it up. And on the 9th and 10th of June, 100 soldiers, 15 police officers and 2 sniffer dogs were brought in to search the south side of the city. From that search, no extra clues were discovered, and 2 weeks later, lead detective Roger Nicklin admitted publicly that they had no idea what had happened to Mark. Several leads were called in to law enforcement, but would soon be found out to be unrelated to Mark's case. On one occasion, there was a train driver who said he saw a fox carrying what looked like a small child's arm in its mouth, but this turned out to be nothing but animal bones. Several locals claimed to have smelled a putrid smell coming from a rural area in the village of Crowthorne. This ended up being discarded sheep carcasses. Missing posters were put up all over the UK, and the case received national media coverage, eventually being picked up by the OGs of true crime, Crimewatch UK. Mark's story, which aired on the 7th of June in 1984, generated a lot of interest. In fact, the Crimewatch team received over 400 calls that evening. Several eyewitnesses saw Mark being led out of the fun fair by a man who was described as being over 6 feet tall with a scruffy appearance and a long nose. They claimed that this same man appeared to be watching Mark from a distance as he walked around the fair that day. Others in attendance reported seeing Mark and the tall man on the dodgems together shortly before he left. The next and final sighting of Mark seemed slightly more sinister, as he was seen on Langborough Road being dragged by the arm. Hoping to jog the memories of those who were there that afternoon, a reconstruction was featured on a second episode of Crimewatch. Over 1,000 phone calls were received after that episode aired, but no concrete proof could be found regarding the missing boy, and for a short period of time, the eye of suspicion was even fixed on the Tildesley family. Mark Anthony Tildesley was born on the 31st of August 1976 to his parents John and Lavinia. Being their third child, Mark was a great deal younger than his other siblings. His sister Christina was born in 1959 and his brother Christopher was born in 1963. A shy boy by nature, Mark focused on his schoolwork whilst attending the Palmer Church of England primary school. His family led a quiet and happy life, and there was no red flags that would suggest that something was amiss. Law enforcement, however, were slightly suspicious about the large age gap between Mark and his siblings, specifically Christina, who was 17 years older. They were questioning whether Mark was her brother at all, or whether he might be her son. At the time, Lavinia said the whole concept was ridiculous and, of course, untrue. It was later proven that this was nothing but a baseless theory. Investigators would also question Big Brother Chris's relationship with Mark. When he admitted that only hours before his brother went missing, he had had an argument with him. Now, no one wants an innocent family to be blamed for a crime they didn't commit. But it wouldn't be the first time that a family would stage an abduction in the wake of a murder to cover their tracks. Let's not forget the eerily similar case of Timothy Wiltsey, which took place on May 25th, 1991. His mum, Michelle Ludzinski, claimed that someone had snatched her 5-year-old son from a carnival in New Jersey. Once little Timmy's remains were discovered wrapped in a baby blanket from Michelle's home in a rural area near her former workplace, police began to question whether her story was in fact true. The young mother was tried and convicted, but later released due to a lack of physical evidence. However, many in the true crime community still believe she was guilty. So, were the Tildesley family hiding some deep dark secret? No, they weren't. They were just a hard-working family praying that their son would return home. But sadly, 2 anonymous phone calls would rip those dreams to shreds. Both anonymous phone calls mentioned the name Martin Early, a man who worked at the carnival for over 11 years and had been working there that night. When he was taken into custody, he pretty quickly admitted to murdering and sexually assaulting Mark Tildesley in a caravan. However, Martin suffered from severe mental illness and would continuously change his story. Police soon determined that this was indeed a false confession. This wouldn't be totally useless, as it allowed police to look closer into other carnival employees, more specifically a man named Sidney Cook. Sidney Cook had worked for carnivals all over the UK, and his co-workers had the same thing to say about him. He was creepy around young boys, and he matched the description of the man last seen with Mark Tildesley. There was one big problem though. Carnival owner Rosie Gray backed up Sidney's claim that he wasn't in Wokingham on the 1st of June. Instead, he was at a carnival in London. So, because of this, police had to let him go. But we will soon find out that Rosie lied. Halloween approached in 1984, and what should have been a time of fun and games was a time of confusion and panic. With investigators no closer to solving Mark's disappearance, they even warned parents not to allow their children to go out trick-or-treating alone that year. 5 years would pass, and after a string of unsolved sex attacks on young children, the Metropolitan Police construct a task force called Operation Orchid. At this same time, a paedophile ring nicknamed the Dirty Dozen had been operating in the UK since the 1970s. It was their pattern to abduct vulnerable or lone young children, often boys, and take them to a safe house, which was a property unknown to law enforcement and social services. It just so happened that carnival worker Sidney Cook, who ran the Test Your Strength attraction at the local fun fair, was the ringleader of this group. During another operation named Operation Stranger, it was determined that the members of the Dirty Dozen had been taking their sick fantasies to a whole new low. Within the space of only 2 weeks, in November 1985, 2 young boys were found dead. 14-year-old Jason Swift, who was living in Hackney in London, was reported missing in the June when he stopped writing home to family and friends. His nude body would later be found on a rural farm in Essex. He'd been sexually assaulted. 1 week later, the remains of 6-year-old Barry Lewis would be found after he'd been reported missing on the 15th of September by his family in South London. Both boys were found to have had the same tranquilizer in their system, therefore linking the two murders. In the aftermath of both crimes, locals reported seeing a man in a blue Jaguar pulling up to young boys trying to lure them inside. Funnily enough, Sidney Cook, ringleader of the Dirty Dozen, also drove a blue Jaguar. Members of this secret club also included Leslie Bailey, Lenny Smith, Robert Oliver, Stephen Barrell and Brian Turner, who, fun fact, was a scoutmaster for the Boy Scouts and was later convicted of the sexual abuse of over 20 young boys. I'll say it once, I'll say it twice, I'll even say it thrice, and if you want to block me, you can, but I just don't trust men who work in the Boy Scouts, okay? Scrapey. Sidney admitted to coaxing 14-year-old Jason Swift into his Jaguar that day, and Leslie Bailey would later confess that he witnessed the dead body of Jason being moved from an abandoned flat by Sidney Cook and Robert Oliver. Leslie, Sidney, Robert and Stephen Barrell were all later charged with manslaughter, with Sidney receiving the longest sentence of 16 years in prison. Whilst incarcerated, Leslie admitted to being involved in the sexual assault and murder of 6-year-old Barry Lewis. He was sentenced to life in prison, and again in 1992 he made another shocking confession. Leslie Bailey claimed that Sidney Cook had abducted Mark from the carnival that night, took him to his caravan nearby, where he was then sexually assaulted by several men. His body was then disposed of by Sidney Cook, as in Leslie's words, this was kind of his thing. Leslie was always adamant he had no idea where Mark was buried, and of course Sidney Cook, he wasn't talking, but despite Leslie's testimony, he was the only one who was ever charged in the sexual assault and murder of Mark Tildesley. After only 9 years in prison, a fraction of his original sentence, Sidney was once again free to walk the streets of London, but he was quickly rearrested for a sexual assault on 2 boys which occurred back in the 1970s. When in 1993, Dirty Dozen member Leslie Bailey was hung in his cell via a bed sheet by 2 inmates, it's safe to say that no one here grieved that loss. This wouldn't be the first time that one of these men would be targeted. Rumoured member 46-year-old Bill Malcolm was shot dead on his front doorstep. The scary thing is, many of these monsters still walk our streets today. Here's known child killer Robert Oliver in 2014 enjoying a stroll walking down the street next to a mother whose identity has been hidden, and she has no idea exactly what or who is walking amongst her and her children. From Leslie Bailey's jailhouse confession, it's believed that Mark Tildesley was picked out by Sidney Cook that day at the sweet shop. When he was abducted, he was taken from the carnival to Sidney's caravan, where he was fed a cocktail of milk and a strong sedative. Sidney then disposed of his body and asked other employees at the carnival that night to cover for him if police ever came asking questions. One of the saddest things about this case is that law enforcement believe that Mark was dead long before Lavinia and John even arrived at the carnival looking for him that night. John passed away in 2005 and Lavinia died in 2011, never truly knowing what became of their youngest son. Till the very end, the couple believed that Sidney Cook was the ringleader in their son's murder, one because of Leslie's testimony and two because of a beloved keyring that Mark took everywhere with him, which was later found in Sidney's car. Mark's older brother Christopher has made several public appeals asking Sidney to do the right thing and come forward with the location of his brother's remains. Sadly, it's thought that the Dirty Dozen orchestrated countless underage meetups for those in positions of power, and the three boys mentioned in this week's case were not the only victims. In July 1981, 8-year-old Vishal Malhotra was reported missing in Putney in London. It was believed he was abducted whilst en route to watch the royal wedding of Princess Diana and Prince Charles. His remains were later found on the 25th of February 1982. His family have long suspected that Vishal was yet another victim of the Dirty Dozen. For years they've been campaigning for an inquest into his death. It's been rumoured in recent years that the reason Vishal's case remained unsolved for so long was because the gang selected him as a victim for a high-profile client, perhaps a politician. In 2021, an investigation was launched to see if any connection could be made between the Dirty Dozen and the unsolved murder of Sean McGann in 1979. This particular case shares some startling similarities with the disappearance of Mark Tildesley. Number one, both boys went missing from an Easter fun fair, and two, both crimes were believed to be sexually motivated. He was also living up north at the time of his death in an area that was unfamiliar to Sidney Cook. Sidney Cook also didn't work at the carnival he went missing at, and neither did any of his associates. However many crimes that are eventually linked back to the Dirty Dozen, I think we can all agree from what we've heard today is that the cases mentioned are only the tip of the iceberg. We can never truly understand the amount of death and destruction that Sidney Cook left in his wake. Mark was just a regular little boy in the 1980s. He loved riding his bike and spending time with his family. He had a trusting nature and always gave people the benefit of the doubt. Through the eyes of a child, he saw no danger, no fear, only a kind stranger and an opportunity to ride the dodgems. Fun fairs should be a place of pure joy and magic. Kids shouldn't have to second guess every smile behind the ticket booth. But this was no normal carnival, and with the Dirty Dozen at the helm, it became the Carnival of Souls. If you have any further information on this case, please don't hesitate to contact Crime Stoppers using the number in the description box below. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please give it a big thumbs up for me. It really helps my wee channel. If you're watching for the first time and the raspy voice and bad hairdo hasn't put you off entirely, then hit that subscribe button and ding the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. If you would like to follow me, not home or to the carnival because that's illegal, then please feel free to do so on Instagram at Megan True Crime. I also have a TikTok page at Megan.truecrime, and we're hopping in the DeLorean and going back in time to when Twitter was popular because I have Twitter at Megan True Crime. Thank you to everyone for all your amazing support on the channel. I'm not actually feeling that well this week, so thank you for your lovely comments because they are pushing me through. Just remember, I love you all so much, so lock your doors, don't talk to strangers, and also don't go to carnivals alone because you might not return. See ya! I can't really do that this week. Bye.